welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and roll your notifications to all so you don't miss any of the demonic content. Today on Talk Like a Professor, we're going to cover the term the other and its related verb to other or othering. Conceptually, this is an important term for the field of religious studies in general and demonology and monster studies, two areas close to my heart, more specifically, because it's used to express how we can take populations of human beings and then use religion, demonologies, or monstrous rhetoric to make them less than human. Of course, once someone has been designated less than human, it becomes easy to justify treating them in inhumane ways. Now, this is a relatively difficult concept to maneuver with, so this is a bit of a longer video, and it has a more conceptually difficult idea, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might remain after watching in the comments as a result. In order to understand the other, we need to first understand the self, which requires us to get a little philosophical, but not, like super philosophical, so don't expect a bunch of stuff on Hume or Husserl or anything like that. First, we have to think about what constitutes the self. When you think about who you are, what do you think about? Maybe it's a collection of ideas, actions, memories, but what we might notice is that most of what it requires for us to define ourselves with respect to these things, for example, is myself fast, thoughtful, brave, kind, etc. They require acts of comparison. That is, if I make the personal claim that I am thoughtful, what I'm really saying to myself is something like, I have more attributes or greater attributes that I associate with thoughtfulness than the majority of people I come across in my life. Indeed, if I only changed the people around me without changing myself, it's easy to observe that I would quickly form a different idea of who I was entirely. For example, let's imagine that I run at a speed of 15 miles per hour, or 25 kilometers. Well, that speed is an absolute or objective measurement. It doesn't actually tell me whether I'm fast or not. If I were to look around and see that everyone around me, and whom I was aware of, is running at, say, 10 miles an hour, well, then presumably I would think of myself as fast, and probably very fast. If, on the other hand, I saw people running at 20 miles per hour, I would probably think of myself as rather slow instead. But note, in both of those examples, my objective or absolute speed has not changed, just my perceived comparison to the other people around me. So for us to create ideas that allow us to constitute ourself, we need to forge a comparison between the attributes of our mind and body and those of other people. Let's observe that when we engage in this act of comparison, we start to form communities of individuals or tribal groups almost automatically. That is, we can start to say, these people are like me, and these people are different than me. Using our example, we could say that if I consider myself fast, I would be inclined probably to be with other people who I also considered fast, because I would see us as sharing something in common. Now, those individuals who present a tolerable degree of difference from ourselves come to be enfolded within an idea of the self. Those who do not begin to constitute the other. This is how we create categories, from dichotomies like male and female to ideas of white, black, Asian, Pacific Islander, or Native American, to class structures throughout society. In all of these cases, it isn't so much that people objectively belong to these constitutive categories because they are exactly the same on some level, but rather that they can be shoehorned into these categories in such a way that their degree of difference is still tolerable. So what happens when this degree of difference becomes intolerable? That is, what happens when a person or a group of people cannot be constituted as part of the self? Well, we can visually think of it in the following way. For a lot of categorical traits, people actually show up on something of a continuum. The line that we see here, for instance. For us to constitute a category, we need to bracket off a part of this line and call it something. I'm going to use a relatively non-threatening example here and say that my line is hair color, and my continuum will go from white hair to black hair. Now let's say that I want to create a category. I'm going to call it blonde. That means I need to bracket off a portion of this group. It's important to observe that everyone in this group, those little dots, doesn't have a uniform hair color. Some might have dark yellow hair. Some might have strawberry blonde hair. Some people might have a single shock of an alternate colored hair somewhere on their head. Nevertheless, I call all of these people blonde, thereby artificially collecting all of these dots into a group. But what about those few dots that are just outside of the area? They're too close for comfort. So I push those dots towards the other ends of the spectrum, creating a kind of artificial no man's land. In this way, I develop the appearance of distinct, discrete categories, categories into which all people can seemingly easily fit. The ones that don't fit into our category, our sense of collective self, those become the other. Now we get into something a bit more emotionally and intellectually challenging. You see, the self can feel so real. It can feel so profoundly true at times. You've probably experienced this before. Perhaps it's someone who has a different point of view than you, maybe a political position, or someone who sees the world a different way, maybe a different religious position. When we face significant difference, oftentimes our first knee-jerk reflex is to assume that the person who shares this different position is stupid, deluded, uninformed, uneducated, some kind of absolute difference. In short, we assume that they are everything that we believe ourselves typically not to be. We can even get to the point where we start to register some individuals as something profoundly different than us, as something subhuman or even monstrous, metaphorically or literally. Now we start to get into the idea of why othering can be dangerous. When we create groups in this way and then deprive people of their voice and power because we perceive them as a threat, from LGBTQ plus identities to racial groups to colonized people to women, we are engaging in the verbal expression of the other. We are othering those groups of people. It's this practice that has historically created a lot of the monsters that populate our imaginary, making other humans with whom we share the world terrifying beasts that threaten our ways of life and our very existences. Ultimately, it's a difficult thing to stop. Like we said, the way we feel and who we are can seem just so real and true sometimes. Humans are fundamentally social animals, group animals, team animals, and part of making groups or teams is figuring out who to include and exclude. Nevertheless, it's important as we move forward into the future that our practice of group formation be as benign as possible. Too often, things can sour and turn towards othering, extreme othering, process that can lead to violence against and disenfranchisement of various groups of people. From the horrors of colonialism to the ongoing legacy of the Crusades to anti-Catholic sentiment in the United States, potential friends and neighbors have been made into monsters through this process of othering, a process that is still ongoing in these United States.
Remember what your enemy has done to you. Remember what he's done to your children. Remember what he's done to your freedom. Why? Why is that important? Because we are not finished, folks. This is not the final victory for the American way of life. This is just the beginning. Donald Trump entering the White House is step one in a long, protracted cultural war. And the body of Christ has got to have the stomach for war and the fire in its belly to finish it. And the only way they're going to keep that fire going is by understanding what monsters these people really are. Did I say that right, Todd? Did I say that right? They are monsters.
Here I feel it's valuable, worth noting, that the first step towards becoming a monster ourselves is believing that another person could be.